started with a letter taped to my front door. Bold red letters across the top. Final notice, HOA violation. I didn't even know our street had an HOA. I'd lived in Maplewood. Estates for 6 quiet years. Paid my taxes, mowed my lawn, waved at neighbors. Suddenly, I was being fined $250 for non-compliant paint color. My house was white. Every other house on the block was white. At first, I thought it was a prank. But then, the next day, a man in a polo shirt with an HOA badge showed up on my porch. "Mr. Carter?" he asked. "You've been cited by the Maplewood Homeowners Association. You'll need to repaint your home or appear before the board." I laughed, genuinely laughed. "You must have the wrong house. There's no HOA here." The man's smirk vanished. "There is now," he said. "We've reorganized the community under new bylaws. All homeowners are subject to the HOA charter, effective last month." I froze. "Reorganized? Who gave you permission to do that?" He handed me a folder. "The board did. You'll find your obligations in there." Then he turned and left, as if his job was done. Inside the folder were pages of rules I'd never seen, fines, restrictions, even mandatory dues. But the craziest part? The signatures at the bottom of the formation documents. 5 people who barely spoke to anyone in the neighborhood. Something didn't add up. That night I stayed up late combing through my property deed. I found a single paragraph that caught my eye, the original. Covenant from 1983. This subdivision shall not be subject to any homeowners association without the unanimous consent of all title holders. My heart skipped. Unanimous consent. I knew for a fact I'd never signed anything, and neither had most of my neighbors. The next day, I went door to door. Mrs. Donovan, who'd lived there since 1989, shook her head. "Those people on the board? They never asked me for permission. They just said they were reviving the HOA. By evening, half the street had confirmed it. Nobody agreed to it. Still, the HOA kept sending letters, bigger fines, legal threats, and eventually, a lawsuit notice. They were suing me for defamation and non-compliance. But what they didn't know was that the very paper they built their power on, the deed itself, was about to burn their empire to the ground. By the time the court date arrived, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Half of them whispered that I was crazy for going. Against the HOA, the other half silently rooted for me. Tired of being bullied? By a group that just popped up and started running our lives. When I walked into that courtroom, I felt like David facing 5 Goliaths in matching suits. Their attorney, a slick man with silver hair and a perfect tie, stood up first. "Your Honor, this homeowner has continuously violated community standards, ignored lawful fines, and publicly accused the board of fraud." He turned toward me, his smirk rehearsed. "He's a troublemaker trying to dismantle what we've legally built." My attorney, a quiet, steady woman named Rachel Mendez, stood and calmly replied, "Your Honor, this isn't about noncompliance. This is about whether the HOA itself has any legal right to exist." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Rachel handed him a document, my original property deed worn at the edges. This subdivision's founding covenant from 1983 clearly states that any homeowners association must be established by unanimous consent of all title holders. That never happened. The defendants created the HOA without proper authority, and thus, it was illegally formed. The courtroom went still. The board members looked at each other, whispering in panic. Their attorney tried to laugh it off. "Your Honor, that's ancient language. The community voted—" Rachel interrupted. "Voted? We have signed statements from 21 homeowners confirming they were never notified of any vote. The so-called election took place in a private meeting of 5 individuals, none of whom had legal standing to act on behalf of the subdivision." The judge leaned back, adjusting his glasses. "Is that true?" The board's president, Greg Saunders, cleared his throat. "We were advised it was fine to proceed. We assumed the homeowners would support it." Rachel didn't flinch. "Assumed? They stripped people of property rights, imposed fees, and even filed lawsuits based on assumptions." The room murmured. I couldn't help it. I spoke up. "They fined an elderly widow for having a wheelchair ramp that didn't match the community aesthetic. They made families repaint fences for being non-compliant beige. This wasn't community building. It was control. Greg glared at me, jaw tight. You're the reason this neighborhood's falling apart. I met his stare. No, Greg, I'm the reason it's waking up. The judge called for order. He took a deep breath and looked down at the deed again. Mr. Saunders, he said slowly, if this document is accurate, then this HOA may not be legally recognized. Until I verify its status, all enforcement actions are hereby suspended. The gavel hit the bench. For the first time in months, I felt the weight start to lift off my chest. But I knew this wasn't over yet. Because if Greg and his board had been operating illegally, they'd be desperate to cover their tracks. And desperate people, they make dangerous mois. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I started noticing strange things. A white SUV parked across from my driveway every night. My mailbox, pried open. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. Drop the case or it'll get worse. The old me might have backed off. But this time I wasn't alone. Half the neighborhood had finally found their voices. We organized a community meeting, and not in secret. Not behind closed doors, but right in my front yard. 40 people showed up with folding chairs, flashlights, and determination. Rachel, my attorney, stood beside me as I spoke. They tried to silence us. They tried to scare us. But this neighborhood belongs to the people, not a fake board built on lies. Mrs. Donovan, the widow who'd been fined for her ramp, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. I was afraid to speak up, she said softly. But if we don't fight this together, they'll keep doing it to someone else. The crowd murmured in agreement, anger turning into resolve. The next morning, Rachel filed a motion to dissolve the HOA entirely, supported by sworn affidavits from 30 homeowners. The judge granted an emergency hearing. When the decision came, it was short but devastating, at least for the board. The court finds that the Maplewood Homeowners Association was established without proper authority. All actions, fines, and liens issued by the organization are null and void. The HOA is hereby dissolved effective immediately. The gavel dropped, and just like that, the empire of control crumbled. Greg Saunders stood there pale, his hands trembling. This isn't over, he muttered. But it was. Within days, the letters stopped. The signs were removed, and for the first time in years, neighbors started smiling again. Kids rode bikes freely. Mrs. Donovan planted new flowers by her ramp, bright purple ones, the kind Greg once banned. A week later, she knocked on my door with a pie in her hands. Thank you, Ben, she said. You didn't just win a case. You gave us back our home. I smiled, my throat tight. We did it together. That night, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset bleed across the sky, I realized something. It's not about laws or deeds or papers. It's about standing up. When something's wrong, even if it's scary. Because bullies only win when good people stay silent. So if you're ever faced with someone abusing power, whether it's an HOA, a boss, or anyone who thinks rules don't apply to them, remember this: know your rights, speak your truth, and never back down when you're right. Because sometimes, one piece of paper can burn down an entire lie.